Hi, this is Jim Freeze from RX360. I wanted to welcome everyone to the beginning of the RX360 portion of CPHI China 2021. We're incredibly excited to be able to bring you some very accomplished speakers over the next, few hours. But really what I wanted to do today was start us off, getting us grounded on how not only RX360, but I think the industry in general has really responded to the idea of supply chain security and quality when it comes to operating within the pandemic and even in some sectors of the world coming out of the pandemic. So that's what I want us to start thinking about as we really kind of foundationalize ourselves leading into the additional meetings we're going to have and talks, whether it be about regulatory challenges and opportunities, whether it be in regards to using supply chain security toolkits and how we can use them to help us out. And then ultimately talk about what we do from a quality perspective when it comes to auditing. We still have to audit from a quality perspective, but we learn to do some different things, whether it's remote auditing, really communicating better. So I wanted to start everybody with kind of that mindset of where we are from a standpoint of tackling these challenges. So when you look at where we are today, and when you look at from a supply chain security perspective when operating within a pandemic, we really want to look at things that are important, but not only are important in regards to what we've tackled traditionally, but maybe how we've tackled in a new way. That's one of the things I think we can take away as a positive when it comes to the pandemic, is we've learned to adapt and we've learned to do some wonderful new things to help almost upgrade our ability to look at things like security within the pharmaceutical supply chain, how logistics work, whether it be shipping, transportation, airlines, trucks, how we look at those different logistics, how we schedule, and what really almost IT capabilities we have within that. There's also that quality component. We'll get into a lot of that later with one of our other speakers in regards to how we've adapted from an auditing perspective. I think it's really the industry should be commended on how well it adapted, moving to remote audits, looking at different ways to do things. I think it's just wonderful to see. And then obviously it's the materials that we use. We ran into supply chain issues, right? We continue to still have those supply chain issues in maybe getting materials to put together pharmaceutical products. But again, conjoining those last two bullets, quality and materials, is incredibly important. We don't want to cut short any type of quality when it comes to garnering materials when we're having supply chain disruptions. We want to maintain that high level of really being able to make sure that everything is safe for the end user, the patient. Because really, ultimately, that's what it's about, patient safety. And as most of you know, that's what RX360 really leans on every day. So as I've grounded us here on the first slide, I did want to take a moment really to kind of introduce myself. I'm Jim Freeze. I'm the CEO of RX360. I've been here for 4 years. RX360 has been in existence for a wonderful 13 years. And my mindset is that ultimately, like I just said, we are here for patient safety. How do we look at that on a daily basis? Is it maintaining the supply of the security of the supply chain, or is it maintaining the quality of the products? I would argue that it's all of that. And it's our consortium, the member companies and the individuals that work at those companies that have made that possible. And being able to bring on some of those speakers here over the next couple hours will be just kind of enlighten you on how our consortium works and how we really look in a confidential manner to really help each other with best practices to really kind of ramp up the supply chain security, integrity, and material quality in the pharmaceutical industry. And really, to kind of close out this first slide, we always want to make sure that we're paying attention to those things, because if we don't, it causes a domino effect and we go backwards very quickly. So again, thank you for being here today, and I look forward to not only talking to you here for probably another 10 or 15 minutes, but then ultimately I can't wait, just like you can, for our upcoming speakers. So we talk about a pandemic, we talk about supply chain security, the quality of the materials, logistics. We got into all that on the previous slide to give us a foundation, but really, how has it changed? I think from a standpoint of what's important, maybe we haven't changed, but it's how we look at those items that are important. I believe as an industry, we've gotten hyper-focused, which is a good thing, I think. It got us through some of those challenges that we had in the midst of the pandemic, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. That being able to hyper-focus and not take anything for granted when it comes to, the supply chain, material quality, patient safety, really is what's gotten us through. I think if we would have put ourselves in a position where it was business as usual and took the mindset of, oh, we're going to come out of this pandemic, let's just keep doing what we do, we really would have fallen behind the eight ball. So being able to become hyper-focused and really, really look at new and creative ways to do things, I think that's what made the difference. So kudos to everyone in the industry, whether you're listening to this live or you're watching it post presentation. But again, it's thanks to everybody in the industry of being hyper focused and looking at different ways to accomplish things. So when we look particularly at supply chain security integrity, this is something that I think RX360 really looks at on a daily basis and really takes a look at it from a perspective of how it affects patients and where in that supply chain, I guess if you want to say pathway, are there vulnerabilities, whether it's counterfeiting, diversion during the transportation sector, the supplier perspective. All of these things kind of wrap into one, and it's kind of what worries me on a daily basis. How do we tackle that? And from a counterfeiting and diversion, I think it's confidentially updating everybody on what's going on, being able to look at different type of transportation challenges. They're worldwide right now, and they're things that I think the industry as a whole has looked at to kind of get over that hump. It's not about a period of time where, we had a challenge today in transportation and it's gone tomorrow. It's really a cascade of events that leads up to solving these issues. We identify, what a problem might be in transportation, what a gap might be that allows for counterfeiting or products to be diverted, and we close that gap. But when we close that gap and solve that problem, that doesn't mean it's going away. That means we just have to be ultra vigilant moving forward to make sure it doesn't happen again. And as I always describe, the bad guys are out there. They're always going to find new and unique ways to challenge the industry. And one thing I can say in the 4 years that I've been involved with RX360, it's been wonderful watching how companies in the pharmaceutical arena meet those challenges and communicate. Because ultimately, I think that's why consortiums such as RX360 work, is because when people share ideas, they're able to minimize risk on the back end. And I think most of we look at risk all the time now. It's how we make decisions, and really ultimately, I think that is the wonderful thing about a consortium. The last thing I did want to mention to you when it comes to that supply chain security and integrity is it's not in a silo versus material quality and auditing of suppliers. A lot of times people think of those two things totally different or totally separate. I mean, in most of your companies, those two arenas are separate from each other. You might have supply chain security and integrity in one department, and you might have material quality and the auditing component in a whole other part of the organization. But to me, they are incredibly entwined because things that can happen on the security end really could happen at the supplier site. It could happen with the materials that are being used. So we want to always be vigilant and aware of potential adulteration, any types of contaminations. That's where our supply chain security really intertwines with quality. And I think a lot of people ask that a lot about RX360 is we have two entities within the organization, whether it's our working groups that revolve around some type of things like supply chain security, or it's our audit program. But to me, they're incredibly intertwined because they're ultimately leads back to, I'll say it again, patient safety. And if we're not building together those elements of patient safety, then ultimately we're cheating the patient. So again, I believe that they're intertwined, whether you're talking about material quality or traditional supply chain security measures, they're intertwined. So everybody always asks, I talked to you a little bit before about what worries me, and we talk about, things like logistics and transportation and material quality. That is what worries me. But one of the things that I do always take a step back with and say to myself, and at times say to others, is actually, again, kudos to the industry. They've created a culture of maybe not worrying. And as a patient, I would tell patients not to worry. The industry really has done a wonderful job during this pandemic of sharing ideas and coming across new opportunities to make sure that everything is safe and effective. So ultimately, give yourself credit. Applaud industry togetherness. Without consortiums like RX360, we wouldn't be able to do these things. So really what I would suggest is saying, when we identify those challenges and we work together, we are going to find solutions. We are going to minimize risk, and we are going to kind of get us through whatever this next wave might be. And again, I see this happening globally. This is not specific to the Asia region. It's not specific to the United States. It's not specific to Europe, Africa, India. We are literally seeing increased effectiveness across the globe. And to me, that deserves a round of applause. It's a wonderful thing that we've been able to accomplish when it comes to getting through this pandemic. I did want to leave everybody with, who we are at RX360. We have a mission statement that hasn't changed in 13, 14 years, which really revolves around protecting patient safety, sharing ideas, making sure that the quality of materials is appropriate. I have my contact information here, whether it's ideas around kind of this foundational presentation that I've done here for you today, or whether it's any other question, either about RX360, about the industry, about things that are specific to our mission, please reach out to me. My direct email is there. I'm always available for whether it's phone calls, email conversation, whatever it might be. We thrive every day on interacting with the industry when it comes to our mission, and I encourage all of you to get involved. It's just a pleasure to work with the organizations that we have at RX360, work at the internal team that we have at RX360, and you're going to see those people as part of our next set of presentations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pause here. We're going to lead into our next presenters. And again, if anybody has any questions, feedback, thoughts, guidance, please feel free to email me directly. And once again, on behalf of everyone at RX360, thank you. Thank you, CPHI China, for allowing us to put these presentations together. And we hope they're helpful. So again, thanks, and have a great conference. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us here at the RX360 presentations at CPHI China. I wanted to really, number one, thank our speakers so far during the day, and then also thank CPHI China, as well as all of the companies that have partnered with us here today in order to bring these presentations to you. Companies such as Takeda, Pfizer, Merck. We're very excited to have these these great companies as partners. So to kind of start our next session here, I'm really honored to have Anthony Yan from Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Anthony has been involved with RX360 for quite a few years, and he's actually been very instrumental in helping the consortium establish a nice footprint in China. And as we continue to grow in 2022, Anthony will be a key part of that. Anthony currently is with Takeda Pharmaceuticals. He's their regional product protection lead in the Asia-Pac region, as well as Japan. And, again, in the spirit of a lot of the talks that we're having here, that idea of supply chain security and what it means is something that takes on a greater significance every day in our industry. And there are people like Anthony, people like Reggie Jackson at Pfizer, who you'll see speak, people like Tony Zook at Merck, who you will also see speak. This is what they do every day, and this is what the mission of RX360 is, wrapped around that, the supply chain security of pharmaceutical products, as well as the material quality. So again, it all leads up to patient safety. And with that, I'm really looking forward to Anthony's presentation. So Anthony, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, James. So very glad today, talk about the supply chain security at CPHI. So hello, everyone. So today my topic is related about what are those essential elements when you're doing a supply chain security audit or assessment. So I have a very simple agenda, actually. Firstly, I would like to describe what supply chain security is about. And I will go through some key elements for supply chain security audits and with my summary. So firstly, why we consider supply chain security, so I would say supply chain security can provide greater awareness and can empower people engaged in supply chain security management and can broaden auditors' knowledge to detect the problem and prevent audit failure, strengthen the integrity of the supply chain, act as a force multiplier in raising the standards. Knowing what can go wrong and how to identify issues empower all of us to ensure medicines are safe and effective. All parties involved in the manufacture and supply chain must share responsibility for the safety, quality, and the security of the supply chain to protect the products for their intended use. All of this is about patient safety. I think that's the reasons why we need to talk about the supply chain security, why we have that supply chain security take into consideration. So before that, we have a definition of what's exactly the supply chain security. So supply chain security is defined as a set of policies, procedures, and technologies used to provide the visibility and traceability of products within the supply chain. This is done to minimize the end user's exposure to adulterated, economically motivated adulteration, counterfeit, falsified, or misbranded products or materials, or those which have been stolen or diverted. So if you don't have our, security supply chain, you may facing the risks like, you may have a falsified medicines, or you encountered adulterated products, or even the contamination issues, or lack of stable quality controls, theft, diversions. Also, in our supply chain, you can see the complexities, such as suppliers are not always the manufacturer. Especially in recent year, you can see the increased risk identified in the entire supply chain. And globalization is another factor. Increased regulatory pressures and more supply chain partner involved because the new structure of the business, so a lot of change, people seeking the collaborations, but that increased the more issues within the supply chain. So actually, we can see there are many regulations that have already have a consideration about supply chain security, such as uh, uh, U.S. Drug Supply Chain Security Act or Classified Medicines Directive, WHO guidance, government-sponsored programs such as AEO, CDPAD, PIP, and also in China we have a China Drug Administration Law. They all have an indication and consideration about the supply chain security. So this is showing some interaction in between GDP or GXP and the supply chain security. Uh, so in general, I would say supply chain security is a kind of non-GXP measures or requirements. But if you really look at those measures and the requirements in detail, you can find actually many areas is interacting with GDP and GXP, such as provides end-to-end security of the supply chain, secure packaging cartons with proper labeling, tamper evidence packaging, retaining chain of custody, reduce the threat of theft, maintain quality and stability of products, mitigates the introduction of counterfeit, reduce costly damage, recalls, returns, facilitate efficient import process, reduce costly border inspection and delays. So all those other areas, as an example, you can see, some interaction in between two areas. So before you audit or assess your supply chain, so you probably should understand what are those elements in the supply chain security. So I listed some key elements here, such as pre-qualification, facility, physical security, education and training, documentation and processing, and conveyance security, brand protection, personal security, procedural security, trading partner security, crisis management, disaster recovery. Maybe we have others, but those pieces are uh, definitely important piece. We need to take into the consideration when they assess our supply chain. So this is talk about what's the pre-qualification. Pre-qualification refers to the work that must be done prior to creating a partnership associated with your supply chain, ensuring that your potential partners are compliant and operate in a manner that is required is your responsibility. But actually, we understand usually in the organization, when we review or bring in a new partners, the assessment is not only supply chain security, but also involve many other functions like procurement, law department, legal department, or finance or business functions. I think that's a joint efforts when you assess a new partners. But again, supply chain security is one of the important piece for that assessment when you bring in the new partners. And brand protection, is another important consideration. Increased threat to the supply chain can damage your brand. Counterfeiting fake drugs introduced into market, intellectual property rights, ensuring your information is protected, corporate social responsibility, ethical treatment of staff, environment, and understanding and adherence to local and national regulations. So we must ensure that our brand reputation is protected. So again, you have our robust supply chain security process that also help in this area. Um, so physical security is the big area we need to talk about. When you go to a site, when you start, to assess uh, the supply chain security. So you have to take a lot of consideration about physical security. You have to review their compass. Whether uh, they have a perimeter fencing. Here you can see a lot of questions that support your consideration. You have to consider if they have entrance exit protected, or in their office area is same. Do their staff require photo identification? If they have access control at the production area, same thing. Is access is controlled? Is their workstation secured? And shipping receiving area, are vehicle inspected? Uh, you know, uh, uh, are the shipment route known? You know, so and also and like utilities, you may ask, are the utility area secured? Are the staff trained to identify system tampering? You know, uh, so when you assess their warehouse, you may ask, are doors secured? The dock door locked? Are there outdoor staging areas? Are they secure? Do they have a CCTV surveillance? Are workstations secured? Are reject the cage locked? You know, so how to say that? What if there's a you know uh ah Jim, I think I got a problem here. Jim.
I'm here, Anthony. Did your screen freeze up?
Yes, but some yeah, I couldn't read. Sorry. I think yeah.
We can still see it fine on our end.
Can you cut? Can you make a cut like I did the video, or we restart?
Yeah, I think can you see the screen on your side?
Yes, now is I can see my screen.
Okay.
Yeah. So should we restart or
No, you can keep going.
okay? So you can cut, right?
Yep, we're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Maybe we'll restart from this page.
That's fine. Yes, go ahead.
So when we assess the warehouse, we may consider, are doors secure? The dock door locked? Are there outdoor staging area? Are they secure? Is CCTV in use? Are workstations secure? Are reject the cage locked? Some good practice in a warehouse could be well laid out function area as required. You may consider you have enough size, allow partitioning into different areas, good housekeeping, functional and good lighting, adequate security, good operational flow, or product in and out. And in the receiving area, you may consider a delivery schedule and do staff know what to expect, a quantities reconciled, do staff know how to identify a seal that has been tempered, a delivery drivers allowed in the area, do they have an ID, are containers clearly labeled, do the COA or COC accompany the delivery, and then the external dock are docks shared with other business, a dock protected from weather, can stop the view driver from the inside. You can see some good practice here for the dock area could be adequate lighting, as access security, perimeter control, driver waiting area, apart from receiving area, vehicle control, protection from weather. And secure lighting is also important piece. Security lighting can provide several advantages such as deterrence of adversaries and suspicious activities, improve the surveillance and security response, reduce the liability witness potential, enhance the observation. So security lighting should be considered for all of your facility, internal and external. And video surveillance is definitely another important piece to protect your facility. Like video surveillance can detect activity that call for a security response, collect the image of an incident, assess incident assessment. So the CCTV system should include enough camera inside and outside to monitor all the critical areas. Be backed up for both power and data. Be of sufficient quality to allow the detail required and keep monitoring the facility. And security personnel, all the measures put in place should be monitored by security personnel. This may be contract staff, but should include the company personnel to monitor the process. If contract security is used, the company must follow due diligence in choosing a security partner. Background checks should be used. Staff must be trained on security procedures and emergency response procedures. And about the procedural security and the training, so need to establish policies and procedures are required to manage all elements of physical security. All staff should be trained to the level of responsibility that they require. Training should be delivered on a regular basis to all staff to emphasize procedures and related any new information. So all the training records should be kept. So this is a conveyance security. The transfer of a material or product must be secure. Making secure, there is control over the inventory, shipping routes, shipping partners, environmental controls. Good distribution practice has a strong focus in this area. So in transit integration, the actual movement of goods is commonly weakest point in the supply chain from a security perspective. The cargo changed hands many times, and the security control are difficult to manage across multiple organizations. Common in transit security practice are pre and post transit inspection, GPS tracking, even dual drivers for track, security escort for track, and pre-alert. And in transit intrinsic risk, could be the weakness point in the supply chain. While price is moving, the use of legitimate supply chain to introduce contraband of people or harmful materials. Chain of custody is very important. Know your contractor and subcontractor is also a very essential piece. Also, especially for the international cargo, you should follow the 7-point inspection for containers. So when we consider the inventory control, so from a supply chain security standpoint, so we should consider good inventory management and stock control, well-trained, organized, and supervised staff. Record keeping data collection for routine monitoring as simple as possible. Inventory level must be controlled and checked. Discrepancies must be accounted for immediately. Identify surplus, expired, and obsolete stock. So one area is important is all compliance returned suspected classified medicinal products and records must be recorded and handled carefully according to written procedures. Records should be made available to competent authorities, and assessment of returned medicinal products should be performed before any approval for resale. A consistent approach by all partners in the supply chain is required in order to be successful in the fight against classified medicinal products. A compliant system should be in place that documents issues, investigations, and outcomes with further follow-up, such as CAPA or customer notification. Crisis management and disaster recovery is also important. Processes should be in place to manage any potential crisis or disaster that may occur. So for the international cargoes, you have to consider Europe shipment may deliver to other regions, so could be flooding, tornado, or earthquake or other crisis occurs. Plan for disaster recovery needs to be in place and tested. Rapid recovery could mean life or death for patients. And computerized system. So from a supply chain security standpoint, we would like to consider the information protection, such as, you have to make sure only authorized staff should have access to system. Data should be secured and protected from unauthorized or accidental manipulation. System failure remediation procedures should be in place. So this is a summary. As supply chain security and GDP requirements serve a purpose. The guidance laid out on the supply chain security and GDP or GSP requires to have been put into effect for a reason. Understanding what is required and how to assess compliance benefits the entire supply chain. Most importantly, it benefits the patients who rely on this medicine. Supply chain security and GDP or GSP rely on informed trained people like you and me. So thank you. Thank you for your participating.
Anthony, thank you very much. It was a great in-depth presentation, and we truly appreciate it. I think a lot of the items that you laid out are things that we really do need to pay attention to when we're looking at supply chains to make sure that they are protected, and that ultimately it circles back to those type of things really lead to patient safety. So on behalf of everyone at RX360, on behalf of everyone that is participating in the virtual CPHI China, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to the rest of our speakers and the rest of the conference. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I would say sorry since
now I get a sign that says it's being recorded.
Hi, this is Jim Fries, CEO of RX360. And on behalf of the entire RX360 consortium, as well as CPHI China, I wanted to welcome everybody to our talk today on the APEC Supply Chain Security Toolkit. It's my honor actually to have one of our board of directors, one of our members of RX360 who's been very active over the years, to be with us today to talk to us about this kind of important, not only topic, but resource that the industry has when it comes to supply chain security. Reggie Jackson joins us today from Pfizer. Reggie's been with Pfizer for over 19 years in a variety of roles. Most currently, over the last 4 years, he's really led a global effort at Pfizer around supply chain integrity and security. And as part of that role, he's done a tremendous job on behalf of not only his organization, but really helping the industry as a whole, responding to issues around suspect, illegitimate pharmaceutical products, and really taking care of the supply chain, which we know is part of the mission not only of RX360, but it's something that Pfizer takes very, very seriously. From an RX360 standpoint, Reggie's been very involved. One of the key things that he has done for the consortium in the past is led our Supply Chain Security Steering Committee. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Reggie. Thank you very much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Jen. So as we enter this reality of virtual learning, I've got multiple monitors. So if I'm not looking directly at my cameras, because I'm looking here at the screen here. So I want to get started just by talking a little bit about the Supply Chain Security Toolkit and give a little background. I appreciate the background Jim gave about me. I want to give a background a little bit about this toolkit. So between 12 and 15 years ago, there were several big incidents, global incidents that happened. Those incidents, you might remember them. Some of you might not know about them, but there was some adulterated heparin that got distributed around the world. There was some infant formula, and there's some cough medicine. And each of these things had their own issues, but they caused a lot of people to get sick or either die because the medicine or infant formula or whatever they were taking had things in it. Like the cough medicine had antifreeze in it. The adulterated heparin had something in it that was trying to fool QC tests to identify it because they ran out of it and they wanted to do something that was cheaper. So the industry came together when all of these incidents started happening across the world. What they did after that, that's how RX360 was formed. It was a response to these issues that occurred within the supply chain. Many different pharmaceutical companies came together to make up a group to try to fight these things. And it's one of the, I've worked in pharma for a long time, and we don't usually work together with people from other companies. It's very competitive. But in this particular space, when you're talking about keeping patients safe, the past 6 years, I have worked very closely with my counterparts at all these different companies. And it really brings me a lot of joy to be able to do that. We're not competitive. We're willingly able to share what we do at our companies. We have benchmarking sessions. So this is pretty good that this problem brought together these companies. So what is that? This organization, RX360, The primary mission is to protect patient safety by sharing these informations that we have come up with, developing processes related to the integrity of the supply chain. Let's see. So the problem statement with what we were facing, continued threats around the global supply chain, and this is what they used to be called, SSFFC. It's a term that we don't really utilize anymore, but it stands for substandard, spurious, falsely labeled, falsified, and counterfeit. Now they just call it suspect product. And suspect product is made up of counterfeit product, cargo theft out of the legitimate supply chain, and intentional adulteration, product diversion, and tampering. This can all be grouped together as suspect and illegitimate product. And when we say that, we look holistically at the entire supply chain, end to end, from the stuff that goes into the products that are being manufactured all the way to the delivery of the product to the end customer. So that was our problem statement. And here was the solution. The solution was the APEC Supply Chain Security Toolkit. And I'm going to go over this in more detail. That's what today's topic is about. But you can kind of see this. There's a link you can click on it, and I'll look at the interactive table in a minute. But I want to take a minute just to take a look at this. It's basically 10 different groups. And these different groups, here, there you go, 10 different work groups established this toolkit, different areas in the supply chain that could help in each of those different focus areas where there were potential for things to go wrong with the supply chain. FDA was, the US FDA was the sponsor for this particular roadmap project. That's what they called it, the roadmap project. They led the work of this toolkit. They had help from other industry authority and personnel, the World Health Organization, and industry experts through RX360. It's another example of, usually in pharma, your relationship with boards of health are usually a combative relationship. Our relationship with FDA and other boards of health is very collaborative. We work together on finding solutions that can help us throughout the industry and keep patients safe. I've worked very closely with members of the FDA for 5 years now. I know them on a first name basis. We have done karaoke together. I mean, we're very, very good working partners, and they're working partners of us in industry, and we're working partners for them in regulatory. So this toolkit is an executive summary of all 10 of those toolkits. And the PDF is an interactive PDF that allows the user to click directly on each tool within the toolkit and be taken directly to the information reference within the toolkit itself. I'm going to go and show you what I'm talking about right now, and then we'll come back and take a little bit of closer look. So this is what the interactive PDF looks like. It's a PDF. I clicked on that link that was there in the presentation, and it brought me here. This is Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, is what APEC stands for. All 10 of these are the different work groups. You can click on any of them. I worked on the product security one, so if you click on product security, it'll take you directly to the executive summary of the product security and all the tools within the product security work group came together with to help this particular session. You can just click, or you can scroll, because it's an interactive PDF. It can go anywhere. So you can scroll back to the beginning, and you can click on any of them and come back. So we're going to kind of go through each one of these and give a little bit of detail of each one of them. There's 10 of them, and they're in order. The first one is the Good Manufacturing Practices, GMP. This is probably something that anyone that's in pharma is probably familiar with. This is what most boards of health base their entire audit standpoint on, is on GMPs, making sure the products are being manufactured appropriately. What this particular work group focuses on is the information and processes surrounding getting the materials, outsourcing, show and shadow factories. And that would be an example of that, is if a board of health goes to inspect a facility, they might have one facility where they're made so pretty and clean, and that's where they do their auditing, but they actually make the product somewhere different and somewhere that's not kept up to the same standards. Repackaging, product release, gap assessments. That's the type of thing that the GMP work group focuses on. We're not going to go through each one. I'm just going to give you kind of a summary of each one, and then you can click on them. There's all those tools you can click on and get more information about each one of these things. GDP, or good distribution practices, that's on the actual distribution of the product, and it goes through a whole bunch of different things: calibration, contracts, distribution, quality management, operations, and personnel. This goes through things like making sure that you have the appropriate background checks on the drivers that are driving your product from a supplier to the manufacturer, to the distributor, to the end customer. So that's the type of thing that the GDP goes over. Good import and export practices. This is really around trading between the global distribution. There's a lot of boards of health out there that have one set of requirements for product that is manufactured within their company, within their country, and for distribution within their country, and they might have a separate set of regulations for stuff that's either being imported into their country or exported from their country. So it's important to know the rules of importing and exporting product in any market that you're going to be either manufacturing or doing any type of sales in. And if you don't have those appropriate controls, it could really make it vulnerable to suspect and illegitimate products of getting into those export and import processes that you have, which if that happens, you have a severe impact. You could potentially have a severe impact on public health in those different markets. Critical and retail pharmacy practices. This toolkit is available. It's going to aid in evaluating and implementing best practices to keep pharmacies, to keep suspect and illegitimate products out of legitimate pharmacies. They span from purchasing to storage to dispensing. One common thing to think about when we say legitimate product, legitimate supply chain. So all of these tools are going to help patients if they're getting products from legitimate sources, like a legitimate pharmacy. If a patient is getting a product from an illegitimate pharmacy or on an online source that's not been vetted, that's an easy playground for counterfeiters to sell. This toolkit doesn't really focus on that because we can't prevent people from putting things on the internet and preventing a patient from going and getting there. That's a lot about education of the public. But this particular toolkit is around trying to keep the products from being suspect or illegitimate when they're going to legitimate pharmacies. Product security, this is the one that I worked on. I'm very familiar with it. This one is made up mostly of industry personnel. It's a comprehensive supply chain integrity and security program aiming at establishing standards through our corporate policies for the companies that are manufacturing the products. The toolkit includes information on conveyance security, which is transporting them from all the way from the materials to the end customer, trying to prevent illegal diversion, trying to figure out best processes for your third-party logistics, warehousing and distribution, monitoring threats, covering incident management, what happens when you get a suspect product, incident that comes in with your product, how do you handle that? There's a ton of information in this one. And anyone that is looking at trying to implement some type of program at their company, this one's probably a key one you want to take a look at. I may be admittedly biased because that's the one I worked on, but I know it very well. And it's very useful for folks that are in the manufacturing world. Detection technology. This goes into how to detect. So I think Jim mentioned one of the things that I do is try to prevent, detect, and respond. Those are the three main things that you have to do with these things. You want to prevent them, first of all. A lot of the policies we have here will help prevent them, but sometimes you can't prevent everything. So the next and most important thing is trying to detect them. When there's actual issues of suspect or illegitimate product, you have to be able to detect them. So this is around detection technology, anti-counterfeiting things on your packaging, ways that you can put serialization and track and trace systems. A lot of countries are going to a serialization. Pfizer has a serialization whole program now. All of our products are serialized. And when a pharmacy gets it, they're supposed to scan it and this is going to detect if they're getting fake products or not, because it sends us back a signal. We can say, yes, that's where it's supposed to be. And if they don't get a signal, then we have to do an investigation to figure out, is there something wrong with the data that we have, or is this a potential counterfeit product? And then we get law enforcement involved. Let's see. Internet sales. I mentioned this a little bit ago. There's a lot of fraudulent pharmacy websites that offer illegitimate products. So you have to be, if you're going to buy products online, make sure you know what you're getting and make sure that the website that you're using is authenticated. And there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do that. I know the US has a way to do that. In the US, there's a .pharmacy, which is what you have to be accredited by if you want to sell products in the United States online. And there's probably some other ones. I'm not sure if there's something similar to that in China. I'm sure your China market folks who probably tell you if there's something like that. But this toolkit offers ways to try to figure that out, so you're not having to just guess. Track and trace systems. I mentioned this a little bit. This one is specific around track and trace. Detection technology is more broad. This one is focused on that product and that process of serialization. This gives an overview on the best practices. I will tell you that when we implemented serialization at Pfizer, it was the most expensive capital project that Pfizer has ever done, because it's global in nature. It has to be implemented at every single site that does packaging. So they have to put this on the package. The validation was tremendous. And then you have to work with all of the different ways that they can track and trace with the different requirements. US FDA has one set of requirements. The FMB for the EMEA region has a different set of requirements. We have to be able, as a manufacturer, to comply with all the requirements in all of these different markets. So you have to have people that know all the requirements in the different markets, and you have to have your system set up to be able to do it. And if you're transporting it from one market to another where there's different requirements, you have to be able to validate all of that. So this work group kind of looked at all of that. And it even says many countries are now utilizing the serialized product and track and trace implemented by the regulatory authorities. Surveillance and monitoring. Once you have all of these processes in place, it's very important to be able to surveil what's going on. We have different programs at Pfizer where we do market surveys, where we go out and do test purchases. Probably a lot of the global security groups out there at the different companies do things like this, where they go and make test purchases from pharmacies, make sure that the products that they're buying are legitimate products that are not counterfeit. Sometimes we go off tips, sometimes it's just on a rotation. And there's not really any one place that we do it. It's kind of all over the board. That's one way we can do surveillance and monitoring. We also have people that look for things. We have programs set up that can detect certain keywords on the internet, and then they send us notifications. We think this is being flagged for whatever reason, and so we have people that go and research that we have an actual surveillance and monitoring team that does. There's 3 of them that do nothing but this. So a lot of people have different groups that work on different things like this. We have a group that works on fraud. So there's different things like this all throughout the industry, and this work group goes over how you can do that, the different things there. Single points of contact. So this is kind of an interesting one. Since the processes and products nowadays seem to be global in nature, you very rarely have a product that's manufactured just for one market. You might have one product, it might have a different label, it might have a different name in another market, but it's the same product. So Pfizer makes a product and they ship it all over the world. COVID vaccine is a good example of that. It's one product, it's not for one market, it goes all over the world. Well, we need single points of contact. So anything that's coming through, if we're having a problem in the US versus a problem in the EMEA region versus a problem in Latin America versus a problem in Africa, they don't need to go to all different people. They need to have one set of person or people that it goes to, one group, so that they can trend on that. And they can say, oh, this is happening in this other region. So this kind of talks about why you have to do that, what there is to do, And it's really good with establishing that rapport with different regulatory personnel that you need. If they're working with a whole bunch of different people, they're not going to be able to remember that. I'm the single point of contact for the US market. I forward every single notification to the FDA. Every 3911, which is the form that we fill out when they're suspect or illegitimate products. I do every one of those for the FDA in the US. And every single law enforcement officer will contact me directly whenever they have a question about something I filled out. So I can talk with them. And it's good because they can tell me what's going on in other cases, and I know what's happening. And so I see the trends. If they worked with different people, we wouldn't necessarily be having the same level of communication. So that's a good thing to set up with your organization. And those are the 10 that we looked at. I'll come back to the acknowledgements in a minute. But I want to go back to the actual PDF, and so we can take a look at it. We're going to take a look at each one of them. So I've given you kind of an overview of each one of them. Now we're going to kind of scroll through. You can see there's the final report, prevention, detection, and response is listed here. The World Health Organization listed a whole bunch of different things as well, and they've got some things here if you want to take a look. But this is the roadmap for all of supply chain security. There's different things for prevention. There's a couple of centers of excellence out there, University of Tennessee Health Science Center and the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. I think there's some additional centers of excellence that were generated after the creation of this PDF. I think there's one in Asia Pac somewhere. It's either in Korea or Singapore. I'm not positive about that, but we can follow up with that. Let's see. So here's the different things with GMP. You can kind of see they have different introductions. And each one of these is a white paper or some type of presentation that talks about each one of these specific categories. If you have access to Jim, you can just nod if you want. Are they going to have access to this after the presentation? Yeah, so you're going to get access to the link so you can come and take a look at this PDF and read through it, take a look at these different things. You can see with the GMP, supply chain verification, yield and reconciliation, gap assessments, etc. Each one has a little summary as well. There's the GDP, and you can kind of see the topics that are listed here: calibration, documentation, self-inspection, operation, personnel, contracts. Contracts are a big thing. You can say that you have to have contracts in your when we have contracts with our logistics providers, our warehousing people, our freight forwarders, it's important to make sure that those contracts are in place. And it's also important to make sure that they're following through. If the contract says this, they need to do this. They shouldn't be doing that. So it's probably talking about audits and stuff like that you might need to do with your people that you have contracts with. The import and export practices. This one was one that didn't quite get finished. I don't know if they have anything now. I can check in with the APEC team to see if they finished anything and have anything. They were the one that needed a little bit more time when this one was initially completed. Clinical and retail pharmacy practices. I talked about this one. There's one toolkit here. You could click on that and see what it takes you to. Here's the product security one. This is the one that I mentioned. It has a whole bunch of different things in it. And you can see there's a bunch of white papers upstream, because it starts at upstream before it comes down to the actual manufacturing site. There's supply chain security. There's webinars. There's white papers, diversion, incident management, how to set up your system at your company to do it, threats monitoring, how to monitor for those different threats. Next one is detection technologies, a little blurb about that. There's a toolkit and there's an authentication technologies document that the WHO created. You can click on that and check that out as well. Internet sales. I mentioned this, being careful about what you're doing with the internet. There's a couple of different things you can click on here. There's a survey and then the actual toolkit. Some of these toolkits are an Excel spreadsheet where it has different things you can click on. Some of these toolkits are just the combination of all the white papers put together. Some of these toolkits are PowerPoint presentations. So there's a big variety of what's here. The track and trace systems. This is the more broader topic. I'm sorry, the more narrow topic from detection technologies. This talks about the different ways you can do it. And if you've got any type of serialization at your company, they probably have been to many training sessions from the different boards of health on what type of requirements are there for the different track and trace systems. Because each, like I said, each market has different requirements. There's probably experts at that at your company that you can talk to. And then the surveillance monitoring one, like we mentioned, there's some different things here. And the World Health Organization has some different things that you can click here as well. Is there one more? There's one more, the single point of contact. So this kind of goes to what I just said about different things. You can look at why you want to do one person to talk to, or even just one group. Like at Pfizer, it's not just one person. They don't contact me. They contact, we have a group set up for global security, the Global Security Operations Center. You send it to that one email and they send it to where it needs to go. Same thing with customer service. If you've got a customer service, a product quality complaint, it's very similar to that. There's probably a product quality complaints group at each of your companies when you've got products that have issues. This is the same sort of thing. You set up a group, one single email of who to contact, and it goes directly to that person, and to make sure it gets delivered to the right person. And at Pfizer, we have different relationships with, like, I know the quality complaints people, I know the serialization people, I know the customer service people. So no matter who they send it to, it automatically goes to the right person, because there's people at all of these different, monitoring all these different email addresses, and they know, okay, this is a security issue, a suspect product, it needs to go to global security, and they forward it to the right person. So it's important to have that. Let me see, I think that's all for that. I wanted to give a couple of acknowledgments. Like I said, the FDA was the sponsor for this project. They had several different, this project probably took about 5 years to put together. It was a long project. They had annual meetings, and they met annually, gave updates of it. The APEC steering committee sponsor or approved this. FDA was sent as the sponsor, and all of these different toolkits had different people involved. Some of them were from manufacturing companies, some of them were from regulatory, some of them were from pharmacies and things like that, depending on the type of nature of each work group. The World Health Organization was also very instrumental in getting a lot of these done, and they had some information for a lot of them, like detection technologies, like the clinical and pharmacy sales and operations. So I want to acknowledge them as well. And then RH360, they brought the industry together to do this. So I don't think we could have done this without the organization of RH360, which brought the big companies and the small companies alike together. So RH360 is more from the manufacturing companies and distribution companies together, and FDA was kind of bringing the boards of health together, and World Health Organization was kind of overseeing that. But that's it. I hope this information was helpful for you, and if you have questions, please send them to Jim or someone at RH360, and we can try to reach out to people individually that have questions.
Here today was a very good overview of what is a tremendous resource, and, you know, to use the name, a toolkit when it comes to supply chain security, especially when dealing with pharmaceutical products. So it's something that I think everybody should be using, and hopefully with either follow-up questions for us, or it's even accessing the tool yourself. You know, this is a tool that's out there for everybody to use, and we look forward to guiding people along those lines. So, Reggie, I'm going to thank you. And as Reggie said, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to RH360. Later on in the program, we're actually going to do a little bit of a more specific deep dive on some of the elements of the toolkit with Tony Zook from Merck. But Reggie, go ahead. Did you want to mention something?
I was just going to say one other thing. So this product security one, it was done mostly by the manufacturers, which is sponsored by RX360. I was going to say that all of the information here, it's all on the RX360 website as well. So you can go to the RX360 website and look, and there's more tools than just the ones listed here. So take a look at the website, and it has a whole bunch of information there for people. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out as well.
Great, thanks, Reggie. I appreciate that, and we'll make sure everybody has those links as follow-up. So again, Reggie, thank you very much. Thanks to Pfizer for letting you do this, and again, thank you for everybody at the CPHI conference. We look forward to our next speaker. Hi, everyone. This is Jim Fries, again, RX360 CEO, and super excited to introduce our next speaker. So as you've seen from another presentation we had from Reggie Jackson at Pfizer, we kind of set that foundation as to what the APEC Supply Chain Security Toolkit was. And what we're going to do now is move into a presentation that really talks about one of the sections of the toolkit and how we can best use it when it comes to thinking about pharmaceutical supply chain security, how the industry does it, how they utilize this toolkit, a little bit of the background on the toolkit. But again, I just want to use it from a standpoint of being able to develop that cascade from one presentation to the next to help educate everybody on this great tool and resource that the industry has. So with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I'm extremely excited to have Tony Zook with us. Tony is a PhD from Merck. He's the Executive Director of Product Integrity. He's been with Merck since 2002. And in my opinion, Tony is probably one of the best subject matter experts in the world of supply chain security when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing a whole big introduction, but Tony, if you'd like to add anything to that from a backgrounder standpoint, feel free, but I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to present not just what Merck is doing in this space, or actually MSD as we're known outside of the US and Canada, but also just appreciate the opportunity to just raise this in the overall general environment. So something that we take quite passionately here at MSD and myself personally. So I've been at Merck, as you said, since 2002. And since 2004, my career has been dedicated to addressing at some level the issues of counterfeit diversion or other types of illicit medicines and protecting our patients from that. So something I'm very passionate about and very appreciative to have this opportunity. Before I get started too far in my presentation, I do need to just make a couple of disclaimers to keep our attorneys happy. The comments that I'm going to make here are my own and not those of MSD. MSD does not endorse any specific technologies or suppliers or instruments. There could be some missing trademark or registered symbols. It does not mean that they don't apply. And I'm also not claiming that this content is complete, but I do hope it is informative. And so as Jim mentioned, and as you also heard from Reggie, the APEC Supply Chain Security Toolkit is a really significant effort, a multi-year collaborative effort commissioned by APEC through the Regulatory Harmonization Steering Committee that provides the entire supply chain and life cycle of medicines products to really provide those processes, procedures, and tools directed at enhancing supply chain security and global medical product quality. And so that toolkit provides recommended best practices on ways to prevent, detect, and respond to issues, as the toolkit refers to as substandard and falsified medical products. I'll use the terms counterfeit, but they're the same term as falsified. And so really trying to make sure that those products do not reach consumers in an effort to protect public health. And so again, that toolkit uses three critical areas: the prevention, detection, and response. And if we look at each of those just quickly, preventing the substandard and falsified medicines from entering the supply chain requires transparency, accountability, integrity of that supply chain with good manufacturing and distribution practices, but also other things such as implementing track and trace systems, supply chain and product security solutions that might be implemented by manufacturers and distributors, and then also ensuring robust import and export practices. Also strengthening the oversight of products that are sold on the internet, which we know is a key resource for the sale of counterfeit medicines. That's also a pretty necessary thing as we look at preventing these types of activities. But detecting them is also of critical importance. And so we look at incorporating detection technologies that would support surveillance and monitoring to identify that products are counterfeit, as well as improving surveillance and investigative practices that, again, further protect against counterfeit medicines. And then, of course, responding to those. How do we respond to an incident of a substandard or falsified medicine? And the toolkit is very instrumental in that as well, with regards to establishing single points of contact, both within health authorities, law enforcement, and organizations, non-government organizations, but also just improving the coordination and communication about incidences as we see them come up. And so what I'll be doing now is really giving you how the industry looks at this, and specifically how MSD looks at this. And I want to start by just providing some metrics that were put together by the Pharmaceutical Security Institute. This comes from their 2020 situation report. And so these are global pharmaceutical crime metrics for calendar year 2020. It's really the greatest resource we have for a complete look at pharmaceutical crime. And you can see there's over 4,300 incidences of confirmed pharmaceutical crime, whether it be counterfeiting, diversion, or theft. And it truly is a global issue with 137 countries impacted and many different medicines. And you can see that over 1,100 counterfeit events. One of the things that we find the most troubling, though, is that there's a continued increase of counterfeiting incidents involving injectable medicines, whether those be oncology medicines, vaccines, biologics, etc. But certainly counterfeit injectable medicines have a higher degree of patient safety risk than some of the counterfeit tablets. And so this really lends itself to a very specific patient impact. And the other things that we're seeing that's kind of concerning is that we're seeing an increase in counterfeit incidents reaching the legitimate supply chain of licensed pharmaceutical wholesalers and distributors. And so in 2020, we saw 194 incidents in 38 countries impact the legitimate supply chain. We're also seeing that a lot of these seizures are commercial in scale, meaning they have more than 1,000 dosage units. But we've also learned that more than 2,500 people were arrested. And so it really speaks to the fact that a criminal enforcement and that collaboration with health authorities and law enforcement agencies is a valid means of mitigating this risk to patients. And so how does this really happen? How do these illicit medicines get to patients? Well, if we look at the legitimate supply chain, manufacturers such as MSD, we make products that actually touches a number of different facilities within our manufacturing network. And then it enters into commercial distribution before it gets dispensed and ultimately given to a patient, or at times it might expire and go into a waste stream. But this is the legitimate supply chain. This is how it's supposed to work. Now, one of the things that we've recently come to appreciate is that each one of these nodes, while perfectly legitimate, is not completely without risk, because each of these are essentially stockpiles of medicines that somebody might be interested in stealing or diverting from. And so while purely legitimate, we also need to be looking at how do we protect these? Because what is also happening here, along with this legitimate supply chain, is a completely separate yet equally robust and complicated illegitimate supply chain. And it's fueled from stolen and misbranded products taken out of the legitimate supply chain, but also fueled by counterfeit products as well. And there's the ability through the entire illegitimate supply chain for that product to transit to a patient through illicit distributors, internet sales, and also illicit retailers. And so this is obviously a huge concern to that patient who's getting illegitimate product. But as we noticed both from the PSI data and just by general observations, we've seen this illegitimate supply chain penetrate the legitimate supply chain. And now we have both of these patients that are significantly at risk from receiving counterfeit or illicit medicines. Now, from an industry standpoint, one of the things that concerns us is that our ability to control this activity is quite limited in respect to the overall scope of the issue. We can only control what we make, how we make it, and that first level of distribution. And that's not an insignificant thing, but it certainly doesn't cover the entirety of the issue. And so we just need to kind of understand that this is really the only part that we can control. However, it's this entire scenario that we're heavily impacted by. because it's our patients that are at risk. It is our brands, it's our company's reputation that is at risk. And so we've come to recognize that we're impacted by a significant issue that we can't control, but we can learn a lot about it, and we can use that learning to influence it, to engage with it, and also help raise awareness, all in an effort to protect those patients. And so what are we doing at MSD about this issue? Well, our product integrity mission, and product integrity is how we refer to the effort to combat the dangers of counterfeit and illicit medicines. Our mission in product integrity is very specifically to protect our patients and company reputations from the negative impacts of counterfeit and illicit medicines. We want to protect our patients, and by protecting our reputation, our patients will then feel comfortable and confident in taking our medicines. That is our entire goal in this entire effort. And so that mission is really actioned across 3 strategic priorities. And what you'll see is that it's very similar to what we see in the APEC toolkit. So in securing the supply chain, we're looking at delivering solutions that provide supply chain security capacity and maintain the security integrity of MSD products as they progress along the legitimate supply chain. This includes the use of anti-counterfeiting features and other functionality that enables the rapid verification of questioned products. But we also know that we can't protect everything. So we know this because of the fact that counterfeit medicines still exist. And so securing what's legitimate doesn't always protect against the bad actors. And so we need to investigate and enforce. And this is the detection part that APEC has talked about. And so our investigation and enforcement efforts really deliver solutions that provide intelligence-driven, proactive, and reactive investigative capacity that engages high-value targets and then seeks to provide a meaningful enforcement action. Now, this meaningful enforcement action is very critical because if we were to learn about a threat to patients, but we weren't able to mitigate it in any way, that's really an ineffective result. And these enforcement actions is what ultimately mitigates that risk to patient. Now, to really support enforcement, we know that we need a very significant forensic capacity because these crimes are often based on forensic evidence related to the laboratory testing of counterfeit medicines, what makes it counterfeit, can you testify that it's counterfeit, this sort of thing. Talk a little bit about that as well. And then also how we're using all of the information and intelligence associated with that. And then lastly, you can't enforce your way out of a problem. You can't fully protect it. You can't fully enforce your way out of it. And so you need people to be aware. And so we've had an equivalent strategic effort to raise public and stakeholder awareness. And the key here for us is we don't want to create alarm, but we want to create the necessary level of awareness for both healthcare providers, government agencies, and patients to make meaningful decisions to protect themselves or their populations. And so in this area, we're creating solutions that effectively raise stakeholder awareness, as well as advocate for policy and regulatory changes, and then really just provide industry collaboration to this overall issue. And so again, you can see that our strategy really mimics what's coming out of the APEC toolkit of prevention, detection, and response. Now, tactically, we have 5 functions that really address this, and we'll talk about 4 of them more specifically. But this is just how our effort is broken up. And so we have teams dedicated to supply chain security, product integrity operations, which is our investigative team, our forensics, and then a separate unit that also addresses issues of financial integrity and financial frauds. So if we look more specifically at supply chain security, and again, as we look at in comparison with the APEC toolkit, this is really all about prevention of counterfeits. And so we've got security risk management. So there are very real dangers. We mentioned each legitimate node in the supply chain is, potentially, a source of theft or other types of fraud. And so we need to understand that risk and protect against it. So we do a lot of risk assessments and auditing. We have very high trade security compliance with CTPAT, AEO, and PIP initiatives on a global scale. We also have a significant incident management and investigative support. So when something does happen within the legitimate supply chain, we can respond and react to that quite quickly. We've also set up global policies and minimum supply chain security standards for all of our products within the MSD. This involves how we procure raw materials all the way to how we distribute to end consumers. This also includes, more administrative things like SOP developments and resource guides, but it's a really critical function for us internally to, again, prevent the introduction of counterfeit and spurious medicines into the supply chain. And then also engagement and awareness. And so what can we learn from the industry and how are we engaged with that? What kind of new technologies and innovations are out there from a supply chain security standpoint that we can implement? And how do we coordinate with all of our stakeholders? These are all critical attributes of our supply chain security program. From a product security standpoint, this is again now part of our prevention efforts as well. And primarily it looks at the use of anti-counterfeiting features. And from MSD's perspective, we would use anti-counterfeiting features for 5 reasons. It can make it more difficult to counterfeit one of our products. It enables rapid verification of questioned products. It can support the identification of diversion. It will prevent or detect instances of tampering. And we've also found it to be quite useful in supporting enforcement actions of confirmed counterfeit or other product integrity events. But it's important when we're evaluating a new anti-counterfeiting feature application to understand, what specific problem are we solving for? What functionality are we seeking to enable, and what are those performance requirements? And then also, what are those failure modes of that particular feature? There's no perfect anti-counterfeiting feature. There's no silver bullet in any of this. And so everything has a failure mode, and we need to identify and understand what that is, because those failure modes can be protected by surveillance and other observations. And then our team in product security also looks at not just the anti-counterfeiting features and the tamper evidence, but also product development and packaging design. And what have we learned from the last counterfeit event that helps us identify ways to protect future counterfeit events? And so we kind of refer to that as adversarial analysis. What do we know about the bad actors that helps us protect the next generation of MSD products? And then we're also quite engaged with our Connected Channels initiative at MSD, which really takes as a foundation our global product serialization. And now through applications of track and trace and blockchain, we're seeking to enable some more innovative and enhanced supply chain security and product security initiatives, which we hope to someday culminate with consumer-based verification capabilities. Now, as we look more at our detection and response systems, we get to our product integrity operations. And so, it looks like just a simple square here, management of product integrity events, but in 2020, that calendar year, we managed over 1,900 product integrity events within our group. So it's quite a significant workload to conduct those investigations, create notifications for confirmed events, and support the enforcement through certain means. We also do a lot of coordination with internal and external legal counsel, whether it be executing powers of attorney or customs recordations. Again, in this area, we have a large advocacy and awareness group that does trainings for law enforcement, develops policies and procedures for our internal collaborations, and just also continually raises awareness of this issue. And as again mentioned in the toolkit from APEC, very specific issues with regards to the internet. And so we've got a dedicated online brand protection effort, and that does some significant online monitoring, engagement with e-commerce platforms, and a number of specific online enforcements. And we've recently found, and one of our newest areas of applied energies is into our intelligence management capabilities. And so what we've learned is that through the better collection and analysis of our data, we can really understand these bad actors even more. And so as I mentioned in that overall schematic of the supply chain, the more we can understand that universe, the better we are at engaging in it and protecting our patients in it. And so our intelligence management function has really escalated in the last 2 years to help us better understand what's going on. And then because of the scale that we work at within MSD, investigative compliance becomes highly critical, whether it be the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the UK Anti-Bribery Act, or other national legislations against bribery and corruption. We want to make sure we stay compliant with that. And so we conduct a significant effort to make sure our trusted partners are abiding by all of those laws, as are MSD employees. And I mentioned, again, as part of our detection and response, that forensics is very critical because in the realm of criminal enforcement and even many civil enforcement cases, the ability to authoritatively conclude that a specimen is in fact counterfeit or somehow violative of a law or patent is very critical to enforcing against that illicit activity. And so we've got a forensic services group that looks at both identification and characterization of illicit products. Identification is really just concluding if something is counterfeit, diverted, or tampered. And frankly, from our laboratory standpoint, that's quite easy to do in most cases. We've got very advanced systems that can identify if something is counterfeit or not. But we found a lot of value in further characterizing those counterfeit and illicit products. And I'm going to share an example of that later. But whether or not this be identifying if an active pharmaceutical ingredient is present, perhaps a foreign API is present, also looking at strain analysis. So if we've seen a counterfeit sample, have we ever seen a similar counterfeit sample previously, even if it's in a different market or different country? And so what kind of intelligence can we learn from our forensic evaluations? That all goes into our sample characterization effort. And again, as I mentioned, we're heavily based on enabling enforcement. And so our labs provide very rapid and conclusive testing to support enforcement. They're ISO accredited in the ISO 17025 accreditation requirements for analytical laboratories. And each one of our scientists is trained as an expert witness and prepared to provide courtroom testimony in support of our casework. And so this kind of lends itself to our capacities, which are really a very robust physical and chemical forensic methods of analysis, supported across 3 global laboratories, that has a very high component of innovation so that we can identify the next generation of counterfeits and even support new types of products like the new vaccines and biologics that are coming out. So this is the overall capability of our forensic services group that has become a very significant part of our detection and response. And so if we just look at perhaps a small case study of how this has played out, I'll share with you an example of a counterfeit Keytruda investigation. And so through the course of doing this for many years, we've come to know that environment that the bad actors work in. As I mentioned, we can't control it, but we can learn about it. And so we know a lot about what medicines are likely to be counterfeit, why they might be counterfeited more so than others, and how they will be advertised and trafficked. And we've historically believed that a lot of counterfeiting and illicit trade was driven by cost or economically motivated, that patients were looking for cheaper products. But we found more recently, and Keytruda is an example of this, that access is also a motivating factor for illicit trade. And in some cases, legitimate access, because it's very highly regulated and controlled, and it can sometimes be limited, whether by indication or approved use or this sort of thing, country level approvals, access can become limited. And so what we've seen now recently is this access motivated illicit trade. And so this is something very unique and very different than economically motivated illicit trade, is access motivated illicit trade. But now that we understand it, we know how to look for it. And so based on the knowledge of the environment, both in this access motivated illicit trade, also what we know about Keytruda, we knew that Keytruda was going to be at high risk of counterfeiting. And we have a very good understanding of the legitimate supply chain. And we're also getting to know the illegitimate supply chain as well. And we also recognize that the internet is a very common way for illicit products to be offered. And so, as I mentioned, we do have an active internet monitoring effort, covers rogue online pharmacies, e-commerce platforms, and social media platforms. And so through our regular monitoring, we found a social media offering Keytruda for sale. That's obviously suspicious. Social media platforms are not intended for selling pharmaceutical products, particularly something like an infused oncology product such as Keytruda. And so we conducted an investigation on that product offering that eventually led to the sample that you see on the screen here. And so, what did we learn about that? Well, just looking at that, frankly, it looks like Keytruda. It actually matches the presentation and the image intended for Keytruda 50 milligram distributed in Germany. It actually has a lot and expiry number valid for Keytruda 50 milligram distributed in Germany. And if you look at the authentic sample, so that would be the known sample there on the right, it looks identical to the question sample. And so this question sample looks pretty much just like the real thing. However, again, back to our detection capabilities through the forensic labs, forensic physical analysis conducted by one of our laboratories found a number of counterfeit defects on each of those printed packaging components. And so even though to our eye they look the same, there are a number of defects that we have used to confirm that those products are all entirely counterfeit. So the carton, the label, the leaflet, etc. But then we wanted to find out, well, what's inside the vial. And so, as again, furthering our detection capabilities, our chemical analysis, we see the FTIR spectra in the top left. The question sample does not mimic the known sample. So again, well, this chemically is not the same. That information was confirmed by UV vis analysis that you see on the right. The question sample does not match the known. And then in the EDX, or the energy dispersive X-ray analysis, which gives an elemental profile, I've only shown the data from the question sample, but you can see a very significant peak for the presence of sulfur. And we know that sulfur is not present, fluorine. Fluorine is not present in the known sample. And so from this data, we can very conclusively say that this is not Keytruda. Based on both the physical and chemical analysis, we know that this is a counterfeit sample. The counterfeit sample does not contain Keytruda. It does not contain pembrolizumab, the active ingredient. And so we know that it's counterfeit, but we don't know what it is. We know what it's not, but we don't know what it is. And knowing what it is actually quite a significant piece of information for both furthering an investigation as well as enabling and supporting future enforcement of this counterfeit event. And so whenever possible, we seek to identify, what is it? And so in this case, we were able to do that through LCMS analysis with accurate mass determinations. We've identified the predicted molecular formula of the contents of that vial. We used some C13 NMR data to confirm the different carbons that were present in that predicted mass formula. So now we know how many carbons it is. We know what the molecular formula is. And then through some really advanced 2D NMR experiments, we were able to confirm the unknown structure of the material present. And it's very unusual. In fact, it was very unusual to us at least, but this counterfeit sample contains the proton pump inhibitor API omeprazole. We have no idea why. And so this is essentially for heartburn medicine, an antacid medicine. And so we have no idea why this medicine would have been used to counterfeit an oncology product. But we oftentimes don't understand why the bad actors do what they do, but it was very conclusively identified as omeprazole. We also identified sodium carbonate in the sample as well, but specifically identified a foreign active ingredient of omeprazole in that sample. And so that's really a demonstration of our detection capabilities. And if we look at our response capabilities then specific to this event, we documented all of those forensic results in a formal report, and we submitted that to law enforcement, who then conducted their own investigation, identified 2 individuals who were operating in Ukraine, but selling product into the US on quite a large scale, and ended up investigating those 2 individuals and prosecuting them in the US on the basis of both this confirmed counterfeit oncology product, the Keytruda, and there was a number of other cancer and hepatitis medicines involved in this investigation as well that were not MSD products, but it was a very large investigation conducted by Homeland Security Investigations in the United States. And so this was a great example of enforcement capabilities and outcomes, because there was evidence of a coordinated large-scale distribution of these counterfeit medicines, and they were able to get a nice sentencing on these 2 bad actors. The principal bad actor received 71 months of a prison sentence, and the accomplice received 33 months of a prison sentence. And this is all well documented in open source newspapers, as I copied here from securingindustry.com. But it was a nice outcome, and really showed the prevention and the detection and response capabilities from MSD into a real life case. And so, well, what have we really come to know then over doing this for a long time? Well, the first thing is that we've really identified and have come to appreciate the significance of the threat to patients and public health. Patients are exposed to very real dangers as it relates to counterfeit medicines, particularly when we see them involved in life-saving medicines like oncology medicines, vaccine medicines, hepatitis medicines. This is a very real problem to public health. But we've also come to really learn about the capabilities and the applied efforts of the bad actors. They are very highly motivated and very creative. They will pretty much do anything to make money, and they're not governed by any rules. There's pretty much nothing that they can't copy. We've seen visually indistinguishable counterfeit products. I showed you an example of one that looks exactly like the real thing. That's very commonplace. We see them really specifically targeting overt authentication systems, like overt anti-counterfeiting features and serialization data is being explicitly targeted by bad actors now because they know that that's being used to verify the authenticity of products. And so that's being specifically targeted. We see a heavy engagement of transnational organized crime groups, just the scale at which this crime is occurring. We've seen direct indications, and this is shown in the PSI data as well, the penetration of legitimate supply chains, the inclusion of incorrect or illicitly sourced active ingredients and drug substances. And then most unfortunately is really a recent increase in healthcare provider and other insider collusion threats, which is really, again, changing the threat level of the capability of the bad actor. But we've also come to understand that this really is a matter of supply and demand. And the supply of illicit products is really financially motivated. The bad actors want to make money. That's why they're doing all this. But the demand for illicit products, as I mentioned, can be either financially motivated or access motivated. But in both scenarios, the bad actors need to create awareness of their supply to the folks who have that demand. And that awareness is an area of surveillance and monitoring that we can conduct and try to find these bad actors. And we also see, again, after doing this for almost 2 decades, that the threat is constantly evolving. New threats continue to emerge, new supply demand factors will be seen, but we can continually learn and apply what we've learned. And a great example is what we're seeing right now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is really a perfect storm of product integrity risks because what we're seeing is the immediate and simultaneous global demand for products such as vaccines and therapeutics that are produced and distributed in limited supply. So it creates a very significant opportunity for the manufacture and distribution of illicit products. And so really COVID-19 products will face and are facing an unprecedented level of threat for counterfeiting, diversion, and tampering. And so I wouldn't say that we're expecting to see new crimes being committed as a result of the pandemic. We're really expecting to see the same crimes we've seen in the past, but the demand being created for those illicit products and the motivating factors are now very specific to the pandemic. So this is a big problem. And so just to wrap this up, what have we really learned and what am I hoping that you take away from this? Well, first of all, issues of counterfeit and illicit medicines does create a persistent threat to patients. This is a very real problem. Pharmaceutical products will continue to be at high risk for counterfeiting and illicit trade. And now during the pandemic, those risks are significantly elevated for those products that are used to either prevent or treat the COVID-19 virus. Risk mitigation really does involve those 3 areas: securing the supply chain or protection, as it is in the toolkit, investigations and enforcement, which is our detection capabilities, and advocacy and awareness, those response capabilities. All of those are needed to really effectively mitigate the risk to patient. And it's very helpful to have a strategy to do this. It's very helpful for MSD to have this, but a single company acting alone is not going to make a meaningful effort or meaningful dent in the overall global risk to patients. And so that's why data capture and intelligence sharing among the private sector is really remaining critical to furthering joint investigations, identifying high value targets, combining resources and capabilities to have a greater impact. But we've also seen that private industry cannot do this alone as well. And so lastly, it's incredibly critical for us to maintain effective collaborations through public-private partnerships, whether it be through intelligence sharing, training, advocacy, but those partnerships will remain the strongest risk mitigation action that will most meaningfully protect the public health. And so industry collaborating with legislators, regulators, and law enforcement agencies, identifying high-value targets and enabling meaningful enforcement actions, this will continue to be the cornerstone of effective patient protection efforts. And so MSD is happy to continue to enable this collaborative effort for the global prevention, detection, and response to the dangers of counterfeit and illicit medicines. And so with that, I thank you much for your time. And if you have any questions, my email address appears on this slide. and I'll be happy to take any questions via email. Again, thank you very much.
Tony, thank you. And, from a standpoint of one takeaway that I got from your presentation was we're dealing with a challenge that isn't going away. Probably one of the best ways to at least mitigate the challenges that people like yourself have in this supply chain security sector is to work together and sharing information and being able to tackle these, as you described, bad actors, collectively, just not in silos. So again, I think that's something that was a nice takeaway message. I do understand that the problem's not going away. And the more that we learn about the different ways that people go about, kind of breaking that security, the better we can become at our job. So I wanted to thank you very much, Tony. It's great to have you. Thank you to CPHI China, and we look forward to the rest of the programming during the RX360 session. So thanks a lot, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jaye Greene. I am Head of Audit Operations and Quality for RX360. I'm pleased to be with you today to discuss pharmaceutical remote auditing and how RX360 has adapted during the COVID-19 pandemic and evolved our audit program accordingly. I'd like to begin by displaying our mission statement. The RX360 mission statement is to protect patient safety by sharing information and developing processes related to the integrity of the healthcare supply chain and the quality of its materials. And we really do strive to achieve this mission every day as we work within our confidential industry working groups and the joint audit program. And I would like to go on to discuss how we have taken the remote auditing model and really incorporated it into our program. So we did develop a remote audit best practice guide, which we have available for downloading. It is a helpful guide that we put together with our industry peers through our working groups and developed a publication that is now available for use across the industry in helping companies produce better reports through remote audits. I would also like to mention how RX360 manages our joint audit program. We do have an audit program that is specifically designed for reducing audit burden in the industry through leveraging a single audit across multiple users. So we can sit in the middle as an objective liaison through this process, and we can work with sponsor companies who are managing their vendors through our program, and the sponsors are funding the audit and providing to us their needs while we protect the confidentiality of each sponsor and can collect those needs and execute one audit to satisfy multiple sponsors. It is a way of also allowing that single audit cost to be shared among the sponsors and allowing that auditee to host only once instead of multiple times. So it's managing a helpful system for reducing cost and audit burden across the industry. Another way that we continue that leverage is through the licensing of that audit report at the end of the process. So we can also take that same audit and continue providing it to the industry through our license program. So additional customers can access ready reports from us and license them through a strict process that we have, where we also must gain the auditee's permission for each and every user to have access to that report. So that's including sponsors as well as licensees. And we will not disclose any audit information to anyone without the auditee's specific permission in writing for each and every company to have access. We also have confidentiality agreement requirements that the sponsors and licensees must agree to, ensuring that they understand the rules, that they cannot share that report with anyone else outside of their company. And so confidentiality protection is a big part of our program. Our joint audit program also continues through to the CAPA stage in the process. We do stay involved until the CAPAs are shown to have effective evidence of correction and closure. And we issue a final closing letter to signify that all the CAPAs, the corrective actions have been implemented and accepted and closed. So we do a full service for the industry in providing audit support for sponsors, for auditees, for licensees. And there are some specific advantages that RX360 offers for our membership as well. As I may have mentioned, the RX360 audit program is open to anyone, members and non-members of RX360. However, if you are a member company, then you do receive some terrific benefits while you participate in our audit program. And I wanted to just mention that as far as next steps, RX360 is here for you. Remote auditing is definitely a method that we will continue utilizing, even while on-site auditing is returning to our standard methods again. We offer the convenience of the license program to the industry, and we invite you to review the licensable audit reports on our website. We have them listed. There's a link right here for you to follow. And we welcome any interests that you have, that we can help support you through your audit system and help to reduce your audit burden. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Good night.